Welcome back to the Interesting Lawyers Podcast. Today we have a divorce lawyer, a family lawyer for 40 years, John Ross. John, how you doing today?
I'm doing real well, Russell, and thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here with you.
Thank you very much. John, in all my years of practice, the one area I avoided like the plague, and I just did not want to get involved in, was family law. And family law, my understanding, my belief when I practiced was that it's a thankless thing. Some people have money to afford a lawyer like that. Other people don't. Nobody really wins. And they're fighting over money, and then the kids get hurt almost every time. But my question to you is, John, why on earth did you become a family lawyer, let alone stay in it for 40 years?
Russell, you know that my wife is a psychotherapist, right? And she calls me a work in progress.
I think that you're a psycho, and I say that lovingly, but keep going.
But look, when it comes to family law, and most family lawyers know this, you're not just a lawyer. A lot of times you're a social worker. A lot of times you're in a position where you have to coach the client and talk to them about their kids and talk to them about the conflict and talk to them about the opposite of matrimony, which is acrimony. And that's really part, I think, a major part of what a lawyer's job is in the divorce field. You're dealing with people's lives, and probably one of the most difficult part of a person's
Why have
life.
you spent 40 years as a family lawyer? What is it about that drives you?
I like helping people. You basically have to look at your profession and say, am I going to leave a mark in this world by what I do? And over the past 40 years, I think I've left several marks for what I do to the benefit of a lot of my clients.
Let's talk about the divorce rate nowadays. I know that in the past it was always hovering around 50% nationally in the U.S. Has that changed at all, and why?
Yes, it's diminished.
Why?
There are a number of factors, in my opinion. One of the factors is people aren't getting married. Therefore, the divorce rate is going down. There's certainly a social acceptance of having children with someone and having a life partner without entering into the contract of marriage. The second reason that I thought of was as a result of COVID. One of the major catalysts for divorce is infidelity. And during the period of COVID, if a husband or a wife was going to be adulterous, they were afraid of dying because who knows who they would be involved in sexual activity with. And they were basically homebound. They were confined to the four corners of their home.
So COVID profoundly affected the divorce rate during that 3 or 4 year period?
Think about it. Two things happened. One is that infidelity was markedly diminished, and money was also markedly diminished. People weren't earning money, and people found it probably economically advantageous to stay together rather than be divorced.
Now, even though COVID is still around, the COVID pandemic part of it is apparently over. And has the divorce rate rebounded to where it historically was before COVID?
Initially, yes. I think there was a pent-up demand for dissolutions of marriage during the period immediately after the pandemic. But I've noticed that the divorce rate has declined, and it also goes to your question to me of why be a divorce lawyer. Statistically, it appears that many of the younger generation lawyers, the people who are graduating law school, they don't want to practice family law. That's not what they want to do. They have the same type of philosophy, and it's possibly because the younger generation of lawyers are the products of divorce. Their parents got divorced, and they don't want to have to relive it in their practice.
That's an interesting perspective. I never really thought of it that way. But is that the feedback you're hearing from younger lawyers about why they choose other areas of practice?
I've heard it from younger lawyers. It's not something necessarily that they speak about, but it's a natural human intuition. If you've lived through a divorce, and particularly if it's been nasty, why would you want to relive that in your profession?
John, you mentioned that the divorce rate has gone down, but isn't it also true that the divorce rate for people over, I think, 50 years old has actually gone up?
That's correct, Russell.
Why is that?
I think there are a number of factors there, too. When you're older and your kids leave the home, you're empty nesters, And at night, you're watching Wheel of Fortune or something of that nature with your spouse. And sometimes you could just be sitting there and staring at your spouse and wondering why the heck the two of you are still together. The second is because of financial independence. I find the older school lawyers realize that traditionally women were not in the workforce the same way they are now. And they get to be financially independent. Both parties may have careers. And if there isn't a symbiotic relationship where people are going in the same direction, it can result in more of an amicable divorce. I think that the divorces where people are over 50 or 60 years old are far less contentious and more so in a manner of people going separate ways in their lives.
I know that the whole concept of getting married and having children, the traditional model, has come into play in politics. And I go out of my way not to take one side or the other about this. But have you seen people on both sides of that issue in your practice as a family lawyer?
I've encountered people, not necessarily in my practice. I don't speak to people and say, oh, I think that marriage and children are at the forefront of an existence, of a successful existence, or the opposite of that, of not being married and not having children is just as significant and fruitful as having children and being married. I do believe that, once again, the generation of my kids, my two youngest sons, who are 24 and 26, is such that I think that they do want to get married and they do want to have children, but A, I think it's going to be happening later in life for them. And B, I don't think that it's as omnipresent in their minds as it was when I was their age.
John, one of the things I always liked about you is you've been this family lawyer, this divorce lawyer, for pretty much most of your career, yet you're also like one of the nicest and most gentle people I know, which seems a little bit antithetical. Tell our listeners, generally speaking, about divorce lawyers, the ones that you've met with and encountered. I know they come in all types, but any common characteristics that some of them have that maybe give you guys a bad name?
It's interesting. I would say probably about 20 years ago, there was a movement afoot with the family law bar. Husbands and wives used to say, I want a pit bull. I want somebody who's going to have my husband's what's hanging on the wall at the end of this case. And there were actually lawyers that fed off of that reputation. I'm a killer. I'll grab the guy by the throat, or I'll grab the woman by the throat, etc. But I think the family law bar, particularly the Florida section, realized that this was not the way to go, and that lawyers had to work with one another in order to help families, just as I said. And this is the way that I've tried to look at my practice. The pit bull type of divorce lawyer has, to a certain extent, fallen by the wayside. Now, so far as my practice goes, I will fight tooth and nail. I will do everything I possibly can for my client, but only for what's fair. Not for winning, but what's fair. Making what we call an equitable distribution. The term equitable, right there.
But in Florida, and as in most other states in the country right now, when it comes to property accumulated during a marriage, it's a 50-50 split.
That's correct. And that's codified by statute now. It's a presumption of it.
Yeah. But the bottom line is, even though it sounds so simple, it's not always that simple.
No, it's
and
not.
That's because, and you've been involved in a lot of litigation over things like that, right?
Yes. And what's interesting is there's cherry picking. So let's say you have a portfolio of $10 million. And you've got some in stocks and some in bonds and some in other securities or real estate, et cetera, okay? The fight sometimes happens where one spouse or the other wants to cherry pick what they want as their part of the equitable distribution. And that's where a lot of the intricacies of high net worth divorces come in, and where forensic accountants come in, and all the money that's spent.
I've heard about crazy stuff like that, like lawyers fighting over a set of candlesticks, let's say. And the real question in my mind that it calls is not just, is this an asset that has X value and they're fighting over the value, or is it just one party trying to stick it to the other party?
Let me tell you a quick anecdote about a judge down in Dade County whose name was Barad, Judge Barad. He was a Holocaust survivor. He had a number on his arm. He spoke with an accent. And I was involved in a litigation where two parties were fighting over the custody of their dog and spending enormous amounts of money fighting over the dog. And the judge said to us when we were in front of him, he said, some people treat their pets like their children, and some people treat their children like their pets. And it rang true to me. There, you have to pick and choose your battles. I don't think that I would get involved in a case like that again. I don't think that I would take money and have to and represent one side or the other where they were fighting over the custody of their dog. And I love dogs. I have a dog, and my wife and I adore our dog. But you know the issue.
Yeah. Is custody really an issue with dogs, at least in Florida? Because my understanding is they're considered personal property or chattels, like a coffee table.
Actually, no. The law has evolved on that.
Really?
Yeah, and it used to be that you couldn't sue a veterinarian for malpractice because of the fact that a dog is a chattel. What's the value of a dog? But the emotional attachments to dogs now and things of that have created a circumstance, Russell, and you might know this as a negligence lawyer over the years. You can sue a veterinarian for malpractice on a pet.
In many ways, it makes sense. I have dogs myself, and they are like my children, because my children have moved out now and have lives of their own. So I can understand that. But that is in play, and there's a lot of money being spent on lawyers to litigate those issues among those who have enough money to pay for things like that?
As I said, I wouldn't know because I wouldn't take a case like that. I just wouldn't do it.
Cases like that playing out in court, right?
I have seen them, yes.
And what's your overall on them?
I think that the lawyers are certainly, we have an ethical duty to represent our clients to the best of our ability and vigorously. And if a lawyer chooses to do, that's fine. But to me, it's a monumental waste of money.
How do two people go about litigating over custody of a pet? What does an evidentiary hearing in a case like that look like? Do they bring the pet to the courthouse?
Russ, it's very interesting. What's in the best interest of the pet? How is the pet going to live its best life, et cetera? What is the bond between the individual and the dog? Let's say it's a service dog and somebody needs it, for emotional support, things like that. There are a number of issues that can come up. I haven't litigated it in years and years, so I'm not really on top of what would do, but that comes to mind. I would say I should have the dog because the dog enhances my life more than it enhances my spouse's wife. It's necessary for me. It makes my life more complete. I take care of the dog. I walk the dog. I take the dog to the vet. All of the things you might say about a child.
These are things that actually go on in hearings and a judge listens up about that. Is that true across the nation? Is that true in the United States as a trend that custody of pets is something that is in play the way that you described?
As I said, I have not encountered such things, so I don't know if there's a national trend or anything of that nature. But I do know that people, and it's logical, if people don't have children or if their children are gone and they're empty nesters and they have a pet or a couple of pets and they're emotionally attached to a dog or a cat, why in the world wouldn't they litigate over it? They want that pet that they treat like a child.
What about birds? Can people fight over a pet bird like a parrot?
I think they should probably be better off fighting over the newspaper at the bottom of the cage.
Yeah, but that's your judgment. John, if someone came to your office and said, look, the only issue I have now with my future ex-spouse is custody of this dog, and they give you a check for $10,000, you're not taking the money, you don't want to get involved in that? Is that what you're telling us?
Yeah, because once again, it goes back to why I became a family lawyer. To me, that's just, it's not family law. There's going to be a winner or a loser. Who's going to win? The only one that's going to win is the lawyer. What's the use? What is the human benefit of fighting over a pet? Now, if there is a real basis for fighting over a pet, such that the pet is necessary for one spouse or the other to live a productive life, that might be something I'd be interested in.
Oh, so you might take the 10 grand if it was a service dog they were fighting over, but not if it's a lap dog.
Correct.
That they've had for years.
Absolutely.
I guess that's your right as a lawyer to represent people you want and not represent people you don't want.
Well, once again, Russell, it's going to the issue of doing good, of giving back to people or serving a purpose to society in general. Now, everybody could look at divorce lawyers and say they're the lowest form of life that there is, just as you were saying you wouldn't do it. I like to look at it like if we treat it properly, if we handle cases in the appropriate manner, we're actually of a higher level of doing things. We're trying to eliminate conflict. We're trying to help people. We're trying to help children live through what they have to live through. And divorce is an upheaval, Russell. It's what, aside from death and illness, it is at the top of the list as to what creates anxiety and unhappiness in someone's life.
It's good to know that you are there to help people who can afford you. Are you a pricey and expensive one? You've been around 40 years. I mean, what's the going hourly rate, just for listeners who might be curious, in the community? You don't have to tell us yours, but what's the going hourly rate for divorce lawyers these days?
It's interesting, Russell. I have a saying. The saying that I have is, when the money goes out the front door, the love goes out the window, okay? And in many circumstances, other than high net worth divorces, people have difficulty affording to pay for a lawyer. So I have a sliding scale. I look at the cases, and I will charge a minimum of $350 an hour, which is a lot of money, to a maximum of $650 an hour.
What about these big, quote-unquote, high-profile divorce lawyers at these big firms? They all have them. What's their billable rate?
The highest billable rate that I have seen in a matrimonial action is $1,750 an hour.
Wow.
Yeah.
Think the lawyer's worth that? Is any lawyer worth that?
Russell, we all put our pants on one leg at a time, okay? And the issues, the complexity of the issues. I'm sorry. Try to turn it off. Can you?
Yeah, you think?
Just so you know, that's your camera with the light on, so if Russ points, just that.
Oh, right there.
Just look
okay.
over there occasionally, that's all. Yeah,
Okay.
this is going to get edited, so it's okay. Not a problem. I can also re-ask stuff as well.
So you were asking me about.
Okay, I'll re-ask the question.
Back to you, Russ.
Ready?
Yep.
Okay. Is any divorce lawyer worth $1,750 an hour, in your opinion, John?
As I said, Russell, we all put our pants on one leg at a time.
What does that mean? How does that answer my question?
We're all human beings. We all have an intellect. We all have been educated. Depending on the amount of experience that we have, there are cases out there. There's a case that you're probably aware of with respect to the reasonableness of fees. It's the Roe case, Compensation Board versus Roe, and it talks about the uniqueness of the case, the quality of the lawyers against you, et cetera.
Not to lawyer you back, John, but can you please answer my question? Is any lawyer, in your opinion, worth $1,750 an hour, or is that just outrageous in your opinion? That's all I want.
I think it's outrageous. I really do. I think that's an outrageous amount of money to charge. Basically, you'd have to be working 24 hours, 7 days a week on one particular case to warrant that type of a fee. And I just don't think that there's any case that I'm aware of or any case that I've handled, and I've handled some real high-profile cases, that in any way, shape, or form would warrant that type of fee.
Now, I think it's very nice of you to have a sliding scale for fees, and what that means is if people are of limited means, you will adjust your fee accordingly to make it affordable for them, because for you, it's not just about the money, right?
That's correct.
Okay, and if anyone wants to contact you, we'll put all of your information in the show notes, but your practice area is where?
I'm located in a town called Plantation, Florida.
That's part of Fort Lauderdale.
Part of Fort Lauderdale.
You practice in all of South Florida?
I practice in Miami, Dade, Palm Beach, Lee counties, Collier counties. I'll go across to Fort Myers and things like that. I've practiced in Jacksonville. I'm capable of practicing anywhere in the state of Florida, particularly now because most of the cases and most of the issues in the cases are dealt with by Zoom.
So you could do it nationally if you...
I'm not licensed to practice in California, but I have practiced in California pro hoc vice, which means that I had a California lawyer qualify me to practice in California, and I've also practiced in Washington, D.C., in Maryland, and in New York.
Now, John, I've always considered lawyers to be an endangered species, both because of the stress and anxiety they have and health issues that result from having such a stressful job. But I also recall a couple of shootings that took place here in South Florida involving divorce lawyers. One of them, a divorce lawyer, there's a knock on his door in the morning. He opens the door. There's an elderly man standing there with a gun, and he kills him. And I think that happened in Plantation. And there's another one that happened during a deposition.
At the
Someone pulled
Cumberland
out a gun at the Cumberland building, and there was a shooting there, and I think 2 people were killed.
Pregnant court reporter along with the lawyer.
Oh, what a tragedy that was. I'll never forget that. But my question to you is, I know people get hot, people get charged up in these kind of cases. Have you ever been threatened?
Oh, yes.
Tell us about
100%.
that.
Actually, the threat came from an individual, a woman, who was at least allegedly involved with organized crime. So I thought that the threat may very well have been real. And this was a woman who was, it's an interesting story, that her husband was in the Amalfi Coast
In Italy?
in Italy. And they had planned on going to the Amalfi Coast, and at the last minute, the woman backed out. And the husband told me that someone tried to kill him in Italy, and that he called his wife and said, "I'm coming back early. There was an attempt to murder me." She undertook completely absconding with everything in the house, including drilling open a safe that she had no combination to, and absconding with millions of dollars worth of marital assets.
She found a locksmith to do that?
Yes, and
I know that locksmiths are regulated. They're not supposed to be doing stuff like that, but
the locksmiths have a code of ethics, and I didn't know that until I investigated that after this divorce took place. And my client was saying, that damn locksmith, I mean, they busted open my safe. She took all of my stuff. The thing, he was actually a treasure hunter. This was what the guy did. If you look at Duck Dynasty and you see where they're doing all of that stuff, this is what this man did. He was a treasure hunter. And he had millions of dollars worth of treasure in his safe. And she took it all. And he was rightfully angry at the locksmith. So we sued the locksmith. And we wound up getting a recovery and settling with the locksmith because they broke into the safe just on the wife's safe without the husband being present. And they didn't even check to see whether or not this was marital property, non-marital property, jointly held assets. They drilled open a safe in a house on just the say-so of the woman who lived there.
so how were you threatened? What did they say?
The threat came by way of a telephone call. It was really very interesting. I didn't report it to the police. I wasn't terribly concerned about it, but it was one of those muffled voices saying, "You better do the right thing with respect to these people." And it was a very prominent Italian last name. And I told my wife about it, and my wife said, "Get the hell out of the case." I said, "I can't leave this guy high and dry." And we tried the case, and the result of the case after a 22-year marriage was that he paid no alimony, he got his house, and he kept his business, which is basically as big a victory as you can have after a 6-week trial against a very prominent attorney on the other side, a very skilled attorney. And it was probably one of the greatest victories that I had because I had done something right for a person who had been wronged.
And fortunately, you obviously didn't get whacked either because you're sitting here with me now.
I had Lisa go start the car in the morning. So that was one of the.
Oh, you asked your
benefits.
wife to start
Yeah, I
the
told-
car
yeah, I told
just in
Lisa.
case?
Yeah, just go start the car, honey. Warm it up for me.
Okay, I'll leave that right there, and let's not go there. I do recall one time I was threatened as well. I was a younger lawyer. I got this threat that someone was going to come to the office, and they got pretty specific about what they were going to do to me, and it was really pretty scary. And I ran to my partner, Carl, at the time, and I told him what happened. And having more experience and wisdom than I did, Carl looks at me and says, "Russell, don't worry about the people who threaten you. It's the people who don't threaten you that you have to worry about."
Absolutely, I agree with that. If somebody is going to do something, I have a friend of mine who's a very well-known divorce lawyer in Aventura. He keeps a gun in his desk, and one of the stories is that somebody broke through his office. Okay, and I have security at my office. You can't get through; it's a locked door. You literally have to break open a door in order to get in the offices. But this guy got through, came into this lawyer's office with a gun. The lawyer pulled out the gun and shot him dead.
Wow.
Yeah.
And was he able to charge an additional fee to his client for ending the case summarily like that?
That's worth $1,750 an hour.
Are we talking about the same person?
No, we're not.
I know you say that tongue in cheek because obviously we're not promoting anything like that.
Absolutely not. But there are, and I think it's true with any legal profession. You could have businessmen where you're fighting about that. You kind of brothers who fight against each other in commercial litigation, who kill each other. Literally, there's murder.
It calls to mind the two partners in a catering hall locally called the Signature Grand, and in a very well-publicized case, there was a murder-suicide. One of them killed the other and then killed himself. However, the order of the deaths, who died first, was actually in play in litigation after that because it affected who would get what or whose family would get what under the shareholders agreement. And that was pretty crazy, getting into the lurid details about who died first. Remember
Russell,
that case?
Yes, I do, Russell. Russell, especially with respect to divorce, okay, and I touched on this before, it is as emotional a circumstance as anyone could go through. It's tantamount to watching a loved one die of cancer. It's got that kind of visceral feeling. And people do wacky things when they're emotionally charged. And I think that the family court judges realize that divorce is an emotionally charged circumstance. And they try to cut through it. They try to see, I understand that this person is testifying from an emotionally charged viewpoint. And it's one of the things where, you know, the old show Dragnet, Sergeant Friday used to say, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. And I think a lot of our work is simply trying to cut through the visceral reactions, the emotionally charged types of statements, and present the facts so that there's an equitable type of result.
Sometimes they get pretty intertwined, especially when there's kids involved and all of that. I wish it was that simple, but I know that in reality, it's not.
No, it isn't. And you have to deal with it, and especially children. I have 3 sons, and I have a son who's 40 years old, and I now have 2 grandchildren.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I become, to a certain degree, emotionally invested with respect to my clients when it comes to children. I really do. I want what's best for those kids. And it's codified, the best interests of the child. But it takes a lot to cut through the emotionally charged situations to see what's best for the child. And that's why you have to present facts and not the emotion of a mama bear who wants to keep the kids or a papa bear who thinks that mom is unfit. You have to cut through it.
I know it gets pretty messy and pretty expensive. So what's the craziest divorce case that you've ever handled in your lengthy career, your esteemed career?
The craziest one that I had was the one that I alluded to before, where the guy he called me, he came into my office, he was a complete emotional wreck, and he said someone had tried to kill him in Italy. But I also had a case where, and this is pretty crazy, there was a stunningly beautiful woman that I represented. She was movie star gorgeous. She was a stripper in Atlanta. She had a child out of wedlock. She got in trouble. She forged checks. She was arrested for forging the checks. She went to jail. She was worried about her child and performed sexual favors on a guard to break out of jail. She got caught, and she had to serve an additional 7 years as a felon, as opposed to having gone to jail for a brief period of time on another felony, but a minor felony. After she came out, and she was brilliant. This woman was absolutely brilliant. She came out, moved to Florida, and by design married an individual who was worth in excess of $500 million. And this individual hired a lawyer to do a prenup and did a background investigation on this woman and found out that she was a convicted felon, found out that she'd served time in jail, found out that she was a stripper, married her anyway with a prenup. She, as I said, was very bright, and as a result of a lot of machinations during the divorce, a yacht was placed in a Delaware corporation name formed during the marriage. An airplane was formed with a Delaware corporation, 50-50 shareholdership, and the prenup was attackable. And one day, she decides they had built a new house, and they had a vault in the house that was the size of most people's living rooms, which had millions of dollars in it, gold bars, cash, jewels. She had the combination to the vault. She goes into the vault and she does her own equitable distribution and takes half of everything that was in the vault.
Sounds reasonable.
Okay.
Since she's entitled to half.
Maybe yes, maybe no. But the husband accused her of taking everything that was in the vault. And it created quite a wild circumstance. Ultimately, the case settled. And part of the settlement was that the husband would pay the wife's attorney's fees.
And that's you.
That's me. But a firm where you and I were partners at one time, the lawyer for the husband and the husband show up at our front desk with several $100,000 worth of cash to pay the attorney's fees that we had gone through on this.
Congratulations. That's great.
Fortunately, one of my partners at that time was a very high-profile criminal defense lawyer. I wasn't in the office. I called him and I said, listen, they're there with $200 and some odd thousand worth of cash that they want to pay the attorney's fees. I'm not accepting the cash. I don't know if the cash is real, if it's money laundered, whatever it is. I'm not taking a cash fee like that. The lawyer came out, said absolutely not. We had a hearing in front of a judge that said exactly what you said. Congratulations, you got paid. My heart went into my throat. I said, Judge, by rejecting it, did we waive being paid? He says, no, they're going to have to write you a check in about a week and get you the money. So it all worked out.
So you got the check.
Oh, yeah, we got the check.
But
which
you know
is
what they
we
say.
demanded in the first place.
Yeah, but cash is king.
Not in that circumstance, it's not.
Reminds me of the old lawyer joke about the lawyer's greatest dilemma. And it goes like this. A client drops a $100 bill in your waiting room. And as a lawyer, your dilemma is, do I tell my partner?
The story that I heard is a client pays a lawyer in $1,000 bills. It's $1,000. Excuse me. And you find out that there were actually $2,000 bills instead of one. And the dilemma is, do you tell your partner about the extra $1,000 bill? So I've heard the same story on a different level.
That would be more equitable.
Yeah, but
I guess it depends on the firm, huh?
No question about it.
Yeah. So that's a pretty wild story. Let me just ask you a couple more questions about prenups or prenuptial agreements. First of all, how popular are they these days and why? Generally.
A prenuptial agreement is a very important document, and I recommend it to anyone who's got a modicum of wealth before entering into a marriage, or someone who believes that during the marriage that they are likely to be far more successful than their spouse. And I'd say that goes both ways, for both a female and a male, or in the case of a gay marriage, whatever it might be, the other spouse. And prenups are very important, and one of the cases that comes to mind is the Kevin Costner case. There was a prenuptial agreement when Kevin Costner got divorced from Ms. Baumgartner. And Mr. Costner's spouse decided to make an issue of the children and child support, etc. The one thing that a prenuptial agreement cannot, in any way, shape, or form, affect is the child support for children. You can't lay that out in a contract ahead of time because being supported is a child's right. It's not the parent's right to receive child support. It's the child's right.
And that would be against public policy.
That's correct.
But John, let me ask you this. What are the 3 easiest ways for you as a lawyer to break a prenuptial agreement?
The first is disclosure.
Meaning what?
Meaning that when you enter into a prenup, as in any negotiation, you have to know what you're looking at. There's got to be a transparency. So if someone has $60 million, you might not want to enter into a prenup, as opposed to if a person has $6 million. You need to have transparency.
About all of the assets you have going in.
Every asset you have going in on both sides. And so the first point is transparency of your assets. The second point is transparency of your assets. And the third point is transparency of your assets. That's really where you got to go. You have to make sure that each party enters into the prenup with their eyes wide open.
But is that also the most frequent reason why prenuptial agreements are thrown out by courts?
There's also financial pressure. There's case law out there that says if you enter into a prenup the day before your marriage, and you're forced to do so, and you've invited all of your guests, and the caterer's ready, and the band is ready, and you have the minister ready, you've got everything, everybody's there, and all of a sudden you're given a prenup.
And told, oh, by the way, sign this or everything's off.
That's correct.
So like a duress or a type of situation?
That's correct. That's duress.
And that comes up pretty frequently as well?
It comes up more than it should. A person should have the ability to look at a prenuptial agreement before they sign it, consider it, have someone look at it for them who's a professional and give them the skivvy on what it means.
But that's another reason why prenups get tossed out sometimes.
That's correct.
What's the third most popular reason? Third easiest way to break a prenup?
Not necessarily break a prenup, but let's say you've got a high-profile divorce. You've got people who are in the public eye, and there's a prenup. The case should settle if the prenup has been done properly, and if there's been proper disclosure, and there's no duress, and it was done on a measured, considered fashion. Okay, the prenup should work. But if you're a high-profile individual and having a divorce, especially with children, go through the public eye, I would say that the impecunious spouse, which is the spouse with the lesser amount of money, has leverage against the more endowed spouse with respect to the money, and that there is a price that a spouse would pay for eliminating the public display of the dirty laundry, let's call it, of having that done.
And do you see that going on a lot?
There aren't that many high-profile divorces where that happens, but yes, when it is a high-profile divorce, when it is a very high-net-worth, public domain type of circumstance, I could certainly see a spouse leveraging that in order to get a settlement.
It sounds like family lawyers make a whole bunch of money litigating these prenuptial agreements, which are designed to avoid litigation. Sounds ironic.
Russell, I would say that most prenuptial agreements, I just filed a case last week with a prenuptial agreement, and the parties agreed. Hey, we entered into a prenuptial agreement. By the way, excuse me, this is a divorce of a couple that's been married for 22 years, and the husband is in his 70s and the woman is in her 60s. And they entered into a prenup, and they just realized their marriage isn't working. They have a prenup. The wife came to my office, and I had to, of course, tell the husband that I don't represent the husband. I only represent the wife. But they agreed. Let's just let the prenup dictate the terms of our divorce, and it became an uncontested divorce.
So to wrap it up, you're saying that most prenups don't become an issue, but oftentimes they do, and when they do, it could be a bonanza for the lawyers and the fees.
I think that lawyers have to evaluate prenups, evaluate the validity of a prenup, and have to properly advise their clients as to whether or not a prenup can be contested, invalidated, or anything of that nature. And that I would say that in 90% of the cases, at least, the prenups should be validated and should be enforced. And it's only in those other 10% where a lawyer can sit there, and you shouldn't try to be creative in how to avoid a prenup. It should stare you in the face if you're going to fight a prenup. That really should be something that a lawyer should consider, because otherwise, once again, you're just fighting for something that's not really fair.
John, I'd like to thank you for your time spent here today, coming here today from your busy practice to speak to our podcast audience.
Russell, I'm going to send you an invoice for my time because I've given you and imparted to you all of the wonderfulness of my 40 years of wisdom, and I'll be billing you at $1,750 an hour.
Have you heard of the new sushi restaurant, Sosumi?
I don't think I'd go to the lengths of suing you. I'd probably call that woman's friend who called me over on the telephone to make a veiled threat that if you didn't pay me, that who knows what might happen.
In reality,
I'm
I think
only
we're
joking
going to go to
about that,
lunch
Russell.
after this. So get the hell out of my studio. Thank you very much for showing up and for educating our audience about some of the realities of this area of practice that few are willing to do.
I appreciate it, Russell. I am honored, and I'll leave it at this. Married, unmarried, whatever, be nice to one another. I think that's really the issue.
Great way to end the episode. So that's a wrap. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.